Welcome to my review of The Shadow of the Colossus for the PlayStation 4. This game was originally released on the PlayStation 2 way back in 2005. Now, it's actually by a guy called Fumito Uda. I probably haven't said that correctly, but he also made Ico and more recently The Last Guardian. Uda's games are actually quite special. He really does try and come up with some really interesting concepts behind his games, and all these games leave a lasting impression. I was a bit concerned when I found out that Bluepoint Games, who are doing the remaster, are actually a Western company. This is a classic game by a Japanese developer. I was concerned that a Western company wouldn't have the sensibilities and wouldn't necessarily really appreciate what made the original such a great game. But when I started playing the remake and saw all the care and attention that had gone into it, all those fears just fell away, and I realised that actually Bluepoint Games have done an amazing job. Now, a lot of companies, when doing a remaster, will just take the original codebase, get it running on the new system, up the resolution, maybe increase the frame rate, add a few visual effects and call it a day. But that's not what Bluepoint have done here. This is actually more of a remake than a remaster. Bluepoint have hired some graphic artists and recreated all the visual assets from the ground up. So this really looks like a AAA modern PlayStation 4 game. Bluepoint have done a lot of remasters and conversions, so they really have the technical expertise for this kind of work. Apparently, they got the original PlayStation 2 codebase up and running on the PlayStation 4 in only 3 hours. They didn't just get the codebase working with a modern graphics engine, they also put in a new physics engine as well. And this really improves the cloth dynamics within the game and also the animation, because the game uses inverse kinematics, or IK. That means the characters can interact more realistically with the environment. Using a modern graphics engine means they can introduce realistic shadow maps and also volumetric lighting, which looks fantastic when you're in the forest areas. You get nice rays of light coming between the branches of the trees. Also, you have some really nice screen space reflections that work on the surface of the water. Even at long distances away, you can see this effect, and it does look amazing. There's even mesh-based disturbance applied to the surface of the water, so when you're paddling around in the water surface behaves exactly how you'd expect it to. Now, because of the extra processing power of the PS4 over the PS2, Bluepoint have really been able to bring the environment alive in a way they couldn't do with the original. There's a lot of particle effects in the game. You can see sand blowing up over the sand dunes. You can see whirlwinds of dust and debris in the landscape. The trees and the shrubbery and the grass all deforms within the wind. The grass deforms under your feet as you're running around. Shadow of the Colossus was way ahead of its time in many respects, and a good example of that is the huge open world environment you get to ride around in. But it kind of feels a bit unsettling. You're not quite sure why. There's a sort of eeriness about the landscape. But as you're riding around, you begin to notice a severe lack of life. There's a few lizards roaming around. There's a few birds that actually fly down and squawk as they fly past you as you're riding, which is a nice touch. There's some butterflies, but that's about it. There's no people, there's no larger animals, and this is a deliberate thing. It makes the environment seem a bit spooky and unsettling, which adds to the atmosphere of the game. The intro to the game is one of the best intros I've ever seen. It really showcases the capabilities of the PS4 and the graphics engine. It's beautifully lit and edited, and it really draws you into the story of the game. The detail in the environment really gives you a fantastic sense of scale. You see this young man riding along in this cavernous area. This bird swoops down through the cavern, and you see a body across the horse. It turns out that that body is the dead body of a young woman, and the story really centres around this young woman She died apparently in some sort of ceremony, as some sort of sacrifice. We don't know why. But the young man is on a mission to bring her back to life. And he heads to an area that's kind of remote. And this is the main area of the game. And in this area there are these giant colossi. And there's 16 of them. And that's what the game is really about. That's the bread and butter of the game, is defeating all these colossi. And when you do that, there's this voice in the sky that talks to you and tells you that then, after defeating all the colossi, obviously your love interest, this young woman, will be brought back to life. Now as you go through the game, killing these colossi one by one, you begin to question yourself. Why am I doing this? Is this voice in the sky telling me the truth? Do they have an alternative agenda here? Am I being lied to? Am I being used? And these majestic, huge, colossal creatures that you're killing, now as they crash to the ground, you get kind of a twinge of guilt. And towards the end of the game, there's a masked character that appears and he's trying to stop you doing what you're doing. Obviously there's a reason why. And obviously I'm not going to spoil it for you, but definitely the end of the game is well thought out. It's interesting, it's articulate, and it does answer the main questions. Like, it doesn't answer all the questions. Definitely there's still mystery left there, but you don't feel as though necessarily there needs to be a sequel. It has a satisfying ending. There is a bow in the game that you can actually fire when you're riding around on your horse, and that comes in useful. But the main weapon is your sword. This is an enchanted sword. It's not exactly clear where you got it, but you obviously stole it from somewhere. And it's the key to defeating the colossi. When you hold it in the air, rays of light come out the sword. And when the rays of light converge, that actually points you in the direction you need to go to get to the next colossi. Once you get to the colossi, the real genius of the game is figuring out how to get on these things. They can be incredibly imposing when you first see them. Some of them are gigantic. But once you actually figure out how to get onto it, you have this sort of eureka moment. It's like, yes, I know what I'm doing now. And then once you get onto it, you have to find the weak spots. The sword actually makes the weak spots glow, so make sure you have it equipped. Clamber around in these beasts, you can actually jump on them, grip onto them. There are furry parts of the beasts that you can actually grip onto and crawl around on. But when you're crawling around, there's this yellow meter. It's like a grip meter or a stamina meter, and when that depletes to 0, you will fall off the colossi. This adds a tactical element, because you need to find places to rest before you go for the next spot that you want to attack, because you know you're going to need a certain amount of stamina to get where you need to go. Now, gripping onto these beasts can be a challenge, because when you start actually attacking the weak spots, they start trying to shake you off. You feel like more of just an irritant than a real threat to these things. You're so small and insignificant. It can be a bit tricky when you're clambering around, because the beasts are moving around and trying to throw you off, and you start dangling from the beast, and then you get your grip back, and you can actually change your orientation when you're trying to get your grip back, so then you can start moving in a different direction to what you thought you was moving in, and you have to correct that. It can be a bit kind of frustrating sometimes, but it does make it kind of realistic, because these things are trying to shake you off. The control system can feel a bit clunky at times. A lot of people reviewing this game have said that the controls should have been a bit tighter and a bit more responsive. But they have gone for a more realistic control system and animation, rather than a sort of arcadey response to the controls. It definitely reminds me of other games like Tomb Raider, which the controls feel quite similar to that. You definitely feel that you can quite easily bump into walls and maybe fall off ledges if you're not careful. And like Tomb Raider, you do actually climb around and shimmy along ledges and things like that. But there isn't too much of that. There are certain parts of the environment where you do have to do a bit of climbing. But the main thing is really just the colossi, and you spend most of your time just riding around on a horse, getting to the next colossi for you to defeat. The horse itself isn't the easiest thing to control, but it kind of makes sense because you aren't controlling the horse directly. It's more realistic, you are controlling the main character who is controlling the horse. So it actually feels right to me, and I definitely wouldn't want to control the horse directly because this game is really about immersion. You don't want to be sort of reminded that you're playing a game. You know, you also want to get lost in this world and this mission that you're on. This game really is about a sense of scale, not just the huge, fantastic big colossi, but the scale of the environment as well. You can look way off into the distance as you're galloping along on your horse across these open plains, and these fantastic, ancient, mysterious structures loom up on the horizon. This game really did deserve a remake because the PS4 can actually do justice to Uda's original vision. One of the things I love about this game is there's no busy work. There aren't endless NPC characters you need to talk to who give you endless fetch quests to go on. There's no crafting that needs to be done. You don't have to go off gathering materials here, there and everywhere. There's a purity of form to the game. It's pure gameplay. This is actually one of the games that reminded me of why I got into gaming in the first place. Now, Bluepoint have been very restrained when it comes to making changes to the game, and I applaud them for that. But they've made some very intelligent changes where they needed to be made. The water system in the environment didn't make much sense, and they sort of corrected that. They have added some replay value to the game for those who want it. There are some time trials that you can unlock where you kill certain colossi in a certain amount of time to unlock weapons and gear. I don't think this changes how the game plays too much. Also, there are little collectible things placed around the environment. These are little sort of shiny gold things that you can crouch down and pick up. They make a sort of audible noise when you get close to them, but you can ignore them. I ignored them because for me, going around collecting collectibles kind of breaks the immersion. But for the second playthrough, I suppose, you can go and collect these things. And I understand why Bluepoint have done it because they've put so much work into the environment, an unbelievable amount of work. And they want to give you a reason to go and explore. So I kind of forgive them for adding in a bit of busy work. They've also added the obligatory camera mode. So many games have this now, but it does make sense because Shadow of the Colossus is such a beautiful game. Again, I wouldn't want to break the immersion of the game by using it on my first playthrough, but subsequent playthroughs, I think I probably will give it a go. And I did have a quick look at it, and there are lots of filters that you can apply that change the look of the game, and you can actually use these filters when you're playing the game, not just using the camera itself. One of them I noticed was Vivid filter, and it did increase the saturation of the game. The colour palette is quite washed out, so adding a bit more saturation actually look quite nice, and I think on my subsequent playthroughs I will actually be using one of those filters. Now, I played the game on the original PlayStation 4, which runs at 1080p 30 frames a second. Now that's quite understandable because the visuals have really significantly been enhanced. But if you're lucky enough to have a PlayStation Pro, then you can run the game at 4K 30 frames a second, or alternatively you can run the game at 1080p 60 frames a second. I spent about half an hour to an hour on each colossi. I did one per evening, so I completed the game in a couple of weeks. If you did it in a concentrated session, you could probably do it in a couple of evenings, no problem. So it isn't the biggest game, it really is quality over quantity. This really is a gem of a game, and definitely worth the asking price of £24. That's what it cost me pre-ordering it on Amazon. It's a game that will stay with you. There's nothing else quite like it. I'm really excited to see what Bluepoint Games tackle next. Shadow of the Colossus is an amazing remaster, reworking, remake in many respects. They have an in-house team now that can do graphics work. They can create textures and do modelling work. So it makes sense that the next project would be at least as ambitious as the Shadow of Colossus. Rumour is it's going to be even more ambitious. Another rumour on the net is that it could be Demon Souls. This was From Software's precursor to Dark Souls. I'm a huge Dark Souls fan, never got to play Demon Souls, so if Bluepoint Games actually do convert it and make it look as good as, say, Dark Souls 3, that would just be phenomenal. I can only hope. I would definitely pre-order it anyway. Now, if you own a Platinum headset like I do, you may be interested to know whether or not 3D audio has been implemented in the game. After all, it is essentially a Sony game, certainly published by Sony. Unfortunately, I couldn't discern that it had been. I did look online, I couldn't find anything online to say that it had. Now, if you don't know what 3D audio is, it's a proprietary format by Sony that kind of goes a step up above surround sound. You can actually hear things above and below you. And it does work. I have Uncharted 4 and it sounds fantastic in Uncharted 4, but doesn't seem to be any evidence that it's present in Shadow of Colossus. Okay, thanks for watching this review. I hope it's been informative and helped you made up your mind about whether or not you should invest in this remake. I definitely encourage you to do so if you've got any interest in this game at all. It really is a phenomenal game. Some people call it a masterpiece. I'm not going to argue with that. It really is a game that stays with you long after you've played it. If you enjoyed the review, please give me a thumbs up. That really helps me out. And thank you for watching. Goodbye.